Dr. Daniel Schiff is a psychologist and organotherapist in private practice in Portland, Oregon, and also teaches at Lewis and Clark College. He teaches a course on somatic psychology there. He has been participating in these events pretty frequently and regularly, and also via the phone and other discussion groups that the Institute puts on, occasional reading groups and the like. If you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. You got the time?
And I'll let you know when 25 is up.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I want to just start out by giving a sense of where this, the idea of this particular workshop or seminar came about.
Could you just speak up just a
sure.
little bit?
As many of you, it's interesting for me to get a sense of who is here. Thanks for kind of sharing that. It seems that so many of you are here are aware of Reich's work and have participated in it, have been in your own therapy, have known it for a long time. Actually, when I was thinking about the creation of this, I was thinking about a lot of people who aren't that aware of Reich's work coming in. Because, relatively speaking, this.
We're the choir.
Yeah, right. So, the idea of presenting what is beginning to emerge into the field of psychology, which is somatic psychology, or the understanding of the central role of the total organism, I don't know if you can say that, but the body for sure, in terms of its place in therapy, that is becoming central or moving to the forefront in the realm of psychotherapy. It's been a wait for me, and maybe for you who are part of the therapeutic community, a wait for the reemergence of looking at us not only as cognitive beings, but as total beings, and bringing a weight for the recognition of Reich's work as coming back into his role in the development of psychotherapeutic technique and his ideas. So I've waited for a while, a good number of decades, and I've been quite pleased, especially in the past 10 years, to see this emergence happen. And I've been also quite pleased that Reich is pointed to as central here. So, where I turn to this is I turn to the greatest source of knowledge now on the planet, Wikipedia, right? Okay, let me turn to Wikipedia. And I'll just read this quote here on somatic psychology. Whereas Pierre Janet can perhaps be considered the first somatic psychologist due to his extensive psychotherapeutic studies and writings with a significant reference to the body, some of which predated Freud, it was actually Wilhelm Reich who was the first person to bring body awareness systematically into psychoanalysis, and also the first psychotherapist to touch clients physically working with their bodies. Reich was a significant influence in the founding of body psychotherapy, which is kind of what a lot of these psychotherapies are being, the rubric under which a lot of these psychotherapies are being looked at or designated. Or somatic psychology, as known in the US or Australia. And he called his early work character analysis and character analytic vegetotherapy. Several types of body-oriented psychotherapies, several is really a minimization. There's a vast number of different kinds of therapies. Trace their origins back to Reich, though there have been many subsequent developments and other influences. Okay, so Wikipedia here acknowledges Reich as seminal in terms of the development of somatic psychotherapy or somatic psychotherapeutic approaches. And if you look at the different curriculum on somatic psychology, and I want to just kind of introduce then what is somatic psychology, what are we actually talking about it, you'll always see reference to Reich. Okay, you won't always see. You will often see reference to Reich. However, getting some knowledge from people who have come through some of these programs, the representation of Reich is often not all that accurate or all that extensive. And yet, the realization of the role of the body and the role that Reich played in introducing the body into psychotherapy is there. So, nowadays, and I'll just briefly kind of touch on it, because of where the field has moved as a result of the introduction of understanding of mindfulness, which is a big factor in terms of really working with trauma, which has been a central element in terms of bringing the body back into psychotherapy. Pretty much those two elements have really brought, and the development of our neural understanding, the understanding of the relationship in terms of neural structure and emotions. In fact, the central place that emotions play in our development, and attachment theory, which kind of integrates a lot of this together, has really brought the body, the soma, back into our understanding. And has spawned many, many different kind of therapies, some of which are direct descendants from Reich, and many of them are not. Many of them come through different routes. And because they come through different routes, they have different slants. Some which, from a person who has studied Reich, seem to be a little off board. And some seem to be nice additions. One of the things that I really loved about Reich is that he was continually updating and introducing and integrating new information into his paradigm. And even though there were central elements that you can see, common functioning principles, central elements that you can see in the earliest of his work, which he restates and reorganizes later on, he continually modified his work. And he continually brought in that which was new into that which he had. And so we have a lot new. There's a lot of new understandings. And some of those really augment some of the principles that Reich laid down. So, what I thought I'd do just briefly here is introduce somatic psychology, what it is. And this came from this course that I've been teaching now for a number of years at Lewis and Clark. This is a course to master's level students. They come to the course because of their interest in their bodies, their interest in working with trauma, their meditative experiences, their work with yoga, their work with movements. They come to this course and they say, we don't hear about this anywhere in our program. And how is this in any way relevant? And through a short course, many of them, in fact most of them, given that we have evaluations and they give a lot of feedback, come away really saying, this has been central in organizing my understanding of psychology, my work, and where I want to move in my work. Now, what makes it central for them in the organization of the course is something we're not going to be able to do that much, but many of you have experienced, is experience. And one of the things I do with this course is I give people these kind of experiential exercises that they follow during the week, and they work on themselves, maybe in a similar way that Hefliner, or if I think that was his name, gave in his class when he was teaching Gestalt therapy. And people do these experiences, they write down their experiences, we share it in class, and as they make contact with these elements that are happening in their organism, they feel really major shifts in their understanding of their self, their emotions, and their experience, and their sense of themselves then in their direction. So, in teaching about somatic psychology, a missing element here will be doing experiential exercises that allow us to make contact with the ideas. Because the ideas are just ideas. But when we ground them in experience and emotion and feeling, they become reality. And that really kind of comes to an essence of what somatic psychology is about. Because somatic psychology always talks about this term, the embodied self. self, embodiment. And what embodiment means is the taking in, the localizing of experience and feeling and sensation and knowledge in one's somatic form. Not in one's spirit necessarily, but in one's somatic form. So, the field of somatic psychology. Just briefly, I'll go back to Wikipedia because seeing that I already bowed down to that reference once, I'll do it one more time. Somatic psychology is an interdisciplinary field involving the study of the body, somatic experience, which is somatic meaning the body, and the embodied self, meaning the feeling of oneself in experience, including therapeutic and holistic approaches to the body. The word somatic comes from the ancient Greek root soma, and psychology comes from the Greek root psyche, which is breath, which is always interesting, psyche and breath, which of course we're back to the body, you know, and logia, study. Body psychotherapies is a branch of this. Now, another way of putting it is that the field of somatic psychology focuses on the complex relationships between our bodies and our minds. Now, I want you to notice, though, in the language, there's something in this language that really doesn't go totally along with where Reich was coming from.
To say
because,
the least.
What?
To say the least.
To say the least. And what the least is, for many of you know, is that we're already talking about our bodies and our minds. And Reich would see that our bodies and our minds, by already framing it like that, is already we're in the split that Phil was talking about. So, somatic psychology attempts to bridge that, but in attempting to bridge that, they're still within that. But it's movement. It's movement. Okay. So, the field of somatic psychology focuses on the complex relationship between our bodies and our minds, and the many ways that our bodies manifest or provide clues to our psychological histories, emotional responses, and interpersonal relationships. Now, that is directly what Reich was talking about, and we'll see that. We'll see how that has developed, those ideas about the relationship, the ways our bodies, meaning our soma, okay, manifest our psychological histories. Remember, and this will be more out if you don't know, that Reich felt that our history was in our body. Okay? We could see our character, okay, our defensive structure, the modes and ways in which we interface with the world, and we regulate our emotions to be this somatic bodily experience. Somatic psychology, drawing from Reich, has adapted that and focuses on that. Now, I'll give you another quote, and this is from, I'm giving some quotes from some of the universities that now have somatic psychology as a main discipline in graduate programs. So this is from Meridian University. As an emerging specialization within clinical psychology, somatic psychology focuses on how embodied experiences, those experiences that we have in our bodies and ourselves, serves as an important but often neglected source of knowledge and insight into psychological concerns and interpersonal issues. So again, we have that same theme. And I'll give one more, the breadth of what somatic psychology is attempting. This is from JFK University. This is again on the West Coast, right? The West Coast, where orgonomy supposedly is now going to flourish. And get from a somatic experience, from a physical experience, from understanding the soma, life experiences are embodied experiences. So I want to come back to that. And what I do with my class is I have them do such as imaginations, which I don't know, maybe we'll have time for one of these, to just, but many of you know this already, to kind of get a sense of how crucial all experience takes reference from our body. We might not be aware of that. Our body is in the background. We don't really know that. It's not figural. It's not in the forefront. It's in the back. But it is continually shaping our experience but most of us aren't in contact with that. Life experiences are embodied experiences, and what they break it up. Breathing styles, how we breathe, every moment, how we breathe is shaping how we are in this room, right at this moment, outside of here. Emotional expression, every emotion is encompassed in a physical kind of expression. How we breathe shapes our emotions. How we are physically influences our feelings. are feelings that influence our body. It's all one and the same. Cognitive style, emotional expression, and relationship patterns are shaped and expressed past and present whole body experiences. And somatic psychology incorporates the body in its psychological investigations, considering bodily states of consciousness, postures, muscular tensions, contractions, range of movement, ways of breathing, skin color, all these different elements, somatic habits, energetic qualities, even bringing in the whole idea of energy, and body pulsations and rhythms as part of the therapy process. Now clearly, as I say these things, for those of you who are familiar with Reich, say, all of this sounds familiar. Okay? All of this are pointers that Reich, areas that Reich pointed to and elaborated upon, that in some way is given credit to and is spoken about within the field of somatic psychology. So let me just really briefly run you through a very little exercise, a little somatic exercise that I do with my class, and just kind of very briefly get, and you know, I kind of almost hesitate to do this given the experience level of everybody here, but I just want you to kind of get a sense of what I'm trying to introduce to this class in terms of their understanding of the relationship between physical movement, sensation, and cognition, and feeling and emotion, and what it means to be an embodied experience. So let's give it a run, give it a try, see what happens. So what I'd like you to do, as you're sitting here, is I'd like you to just imagine a pleasant experience. Okay, so just allow yourself, just for a moment, to imagine a pleasant experience. I'm just going to give you a second for that. Okay. So just anchor that. That's a word that they use now. Anchor that. Just kind of grab it. Okay. Come on back from that. Everybody got that? Everybody got that? Questions? Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate something, then I'm going to ask you to do this. As you're imagining that present experience, I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to say, breathe in and open up your eyes wide. So I'm going to ask you to do this. So let me do it, and then I'll ask you to do it as you're imagining. So here's what I want you to do. First, I'll ask you to do this. Okay, breathe in and open your eyes wide, and I want you to go like this. And hold it, okay? And then, afterwards, I'm going to ask you to exhale and make a little smile. So it's going to be that, okay? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to breathe in. You're going to do the eyes open. I'm going to ask you to exhale. You're going to do the you're going to lower your eyes and have a little smile. Okay, so go back to your imagined experience. Okay, bring that in. Have it in your. See if you can re-enter that place. Okay. Now, while you're in that place, inhale and open your eyes wide. Good. Keep holding on to that imagined experience. Okay. Now exhale, lower your eyes, make a little smile, holding on to that imagined experience. Okay, we just went through one round. Okay, so just very briefly, if anything, what did you notice in doing that?
The smile felt forced.
Okay, the smile felt forced. Okay, what happened with your imagined experience?
That stayed.
It stayed the whole time. Okay, anybody else? What did you
I
notice?
had a hard time holding my breath that long. I wanted
Okay.
to exhale.
You wanted to exhale. Okay, and what happened with the imagined experience?
It went away.
It went away. Okay, imagined experience went away. Yes.
I could feel my breathing rate change, you know,
Uh-huh.
and feel some relaxation.
Okay.
Some straightening.
Good. When you inhaled or exhaled?
Exhale.
Okay, and what happened with the imagined experience?
It stayed there. Actually, I remembered more from that time.
From the inhalation or the exhale?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay. So just in these questions, what I want to say is I'm kind of modeling what they do a little bit in somatic psychology. And really what Reich did to some degree is really kind of focus in on attenuating to the nuance of experience. Okay, somebody else. Yes.
My chronic pain was gone momentarily, and I was able to maintain it when I opened my eyes.
Okay.
The pleasure that I was feeling.
When you inhale or when you exhale? On both, okay. And what happened to your imagined experience?
there was a quality that remained of it, but I wasn't thinking about it.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think I'd say the imagined experience felt more physically real when I was inhaling and exhaling, relaxing, than when it was just an idea.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, for me, as I was exhaling, I felt tension in my shoulders, sort of brief moment of pain, but in the exhale, the feeling of pleasure was maintained. And when I felt the moment of pain, the image disappeared, but then while I was returned to my breath exhaling, the image and the pleasure returned.
Okay, so the image changed in terms of pain, in terms of whether you're inhaling or exhaling. Yes, one last.
A sense of completeness,
Yeah.
gratification, the image, body sensations was one.
Okay, okay. So, as you can, one of the things that you can hear is that people experience different things. Okay? It's not a uniform element. Secondly, that there was some relationship between these very brief breathing and one's feelings, which for my class sometimes is a great aha, which is an aha to me, that it is a great aha, that one's breathing, for them, the experience of breathing can so much change. And one of the things that it seemed to be, that was clearly not universal, is that in the difference in breathing, the kind of it would influence the imagined experience. Okay? So it's through these kind of in-class exercises and others that we begin to introduce something that somatic psychology does on a regular basis in its psychotherapeutic approach. What it introduces how our physical experience, or heightened physical experience, or definitely breathing, will influence our emotions, our feelings, our sensations, and, which we didn't really get to here to such a degree, our ideation. When many people come into therapy, they're not aware of that. In fact, the introduction of this to even therapists, they're not aware of that either. And so what's been happening in terms of this body psychotherapy movement, which is an aspect of somatic psychology, is bringing more and more of these elements into sessions. Now, as many of you know, I mean, this is not only not new from Reich, but not new, I mean, Fritz Perls used it, Gestalt therapy used a lot of these things. But now it's beginning to be incorporated in this much more direct way. So, what happens in somatic psychotherapy is this. This is a brief element of that. So, a person comes into therapy, they have a certain kind of, they're talking about a certain kind of feeling, and a focus might be made in terms of, okay, as you say that, what do you notice in your body? Okay. What do you notice in terms of how you tell me this? If you take a breath, what happens to yourself? Can you feel this emotion as you're speaking about it? And where do you reference that emotion in your physical stuff? If you're talking to me and you're saying, I'm really excited about that, and you shrug your shoulders, can you pay attention to that shrugging of your shoulders and incorporate that and begin to feel that? So as we begin to talk about this, as you'll get the sense of Reich's work, and then I'll come back later on, there are certain central elements that have been incorporated in therapy that allow the person to begin to focus on their somatic experience. And in focusing on this somatic experience, they become more in contact with themselves and then with their relationships with themselves and others. So, I'll probably stop in a moment. How are we doing?
You still have about a minute, and then you'll have 5.
Okay, sorry, 6 minutes. Okay. So I'll just read you a few things. This is exactly what I'm saying, but here is what Meridian University says to those people who are looking for graduate programs in somatic psychology. Somatic psychotherapists incorporate a skillful attention to breath, gesture, muscle tone, we didn't talk about it, but the tension in the muscles, okay? And sensation. Like when I'm asking you, well, what did you notice? And someone says, you know, I felt a tension or I felt a letting down. A focus on sensation in the process of psychotherapy. By attending to the nonverbal felt experience, this is another key word. It comes from the work of Genwin, who studied with Carl Rogers. A felt experience. Somatic psychotherapists have clients, quote, get in touch with important psychological or emotional material that had previously been inaccessible through words alone. Okay. This again has become, of course, we know that, we'll see that, I'll like to introduce that, but words alone cannot touch our affect. Or it can touch our affect, but as it touches it, if we touch in terms of what our somatic experience is, then our affect becomes amplified, and then we begin to make contact. Focusing on embodied experience in the present moment. This is another thing that came directly, we'll see from Reich, and is central, is that we're looking not only in terms of talking about what happened, like this is what happened, and as I had this discussion with somebody, and da-da-da-da-da, but what's happening now in the present moment between you and I, client therapist? As you're talking about this, what do you feel right at the moment as you're talking about this? As you imagine into your discussion with that person, what was the present moment for you then? What were you experiencing? Focusing on the embodied experience in the present moment also allows somatic psychotherapists to facilitate the expression and integration of material that addresses all aspects of the problem or issue. Aspects that have been embedded, another word, in the nervous system, muscle tissue, movement patterns, and bodily habits of clients. Again, coming back to some central issues, that our experience is embedded in our soma, in our totality. And as we begin to attend, as we begin to make focus to it, which is something Reich began to introduce, we now have a wealth of potential knowledge, a wealth of information that has been cut off from us. And this wealth of information allows us then to have more contact with who we are in the world and our relationships and what we're doing, and past and present experience. Aspects that maybe Reich would talk in terms of character. So that's the field, briefly, of somatic psychology today. It's highly integrated. It comes from many, many different sources. What we're going to do here and look at is seeing the roots of where Reich took, how a lot of these developed from Reich's work, and also a divergence. Because as Reich develops certain ideas, certain of those ideas are both incorporated in somatic psychology in the different realms, but also not incorporated. We'll kind of take a look at that as well. And then maybe kind of touch upon where is the potential for this field. The field maybe for Reich, or orgonomy, or bioenergetics, or the broader field of somatic psychology. Yeah, that's my little spiel. Thank you guys.
So I invite Dr. Weissner and Dr. Lewis to come and sit up here. And,
It's Dr. Brenner is stuck on route, I guess.
No, I don't know. Good. And so we'll each say something very brief, give Daniel a chance to respond, and then open it up to the floor. And brevity will be our guide. So please.
Okay, I'll introduce myself.
Oh, I was going to introduce you. I'm sorry. I will. Eric Weissner is a medical doctor, a psychiatrist in private practice, and at one point was the director of resident training in psychiatry at SUNY Downstate. And he is also a member of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute and a frequent contributor at these conferences. Not only knows psychoanalysis extremely well, but knows Reich's works extremely well.
I just quickly add, he was also trained, but doesn't actively practice these days, although he's starting to again, character analysis and orgonomy along with me. in the group that Dr. Sobey formed back in the late 70s.
Right, so I underwent a kind of a backwards training. So first studying orgone therapy and then studying psychoanalysis. And, you know, I think this is an extremely important topic. And I'm still struggling personally with this question of the relationship between mind and body. And I do believe there is something called a mind, but going along with Reich's functional point of view, I would say that mind is a function of the organism, just like movement and sensation and other things that are very plain are functions of the organism. Whether there's a soul or not, I think depends on how you define it. You know, when in the Old Testament, where it says that Jacob went down to Egypt with 70 souls, they certainly weren't imagining little spirits floating above the 70 people who were walking. The soul was the person, and unfortunately, in addition to the organismic soul, they then added, along with the ancient Greeks and everybody else, the spiritual, so-called spiritual notions of soul. But there is such a thing as a person. The question is, how are mental functions related with somatic functions? For me, this is a very difficult question. Freud said something extremely profound when he defined thinking as an operation which human beings interpose between perception or sensation and action. So instead of having a reflex where, you know, you hit the tendon and the knee jumps immediately, or you have a so-called lower mammal who has an instinct that needs to be satisfied, and the animal satisfies it immediately. Now, you know, with domesticated animals, you see them hesitate for a moment before they do it. But with humans, you have this very, very complex process that goes on inside, which can delay the response and action indefinitely. And you have the creation of what contemporary psychoanalysts call an internal world. The world of object relations, the world of memory, the world of fantasy. And it was Reich's contention that the quantities of energy that were contained in somatic function, especially in defensive function and armoring, were much, much greater than the quantities of energy contained in the mental function, in the unconscious fantasies, in the mental aspects of the Oedipus complex, in the defenses that can be described psychically rather than somatically, like denial and repression and undoing and you know, the cutting off of affect, things. But from Reich's point of view, all of these things have to be seen as a functional unity. The question is, what is the connection? So I think that the concept of embodiment really should be expanded to include not only what we think of as somatic, but what we think of as I don't know what.
The whole being.
Thinking, yes, the whole being. Now Freud, just to end on another tangent, I'm not sure how relevant it is, but it's very interesting, which is that Freud, a very interesting tangent about Freud, which is that he did a bunch of neurological work before he became a psychoanalyst, research, cocaine, cerebral palsy, and so forth. But he wrote one neurological book, which was extremely important, which was ignored by his neurological colleagues, and which in a way has been picked up by modern neurologists, and also paved the way to Freudianism and I think also Reich's notions. And the one I'm referring to is his monograph called On Aphasia. And in that monograph, Freud challenged the contemporary notion of localization. I mean, we know that when you become aphasic, you can have Broca's aphasia or a Wernicke's aphasia. Broca's area is here in front of the sulcus on the left side of the cerebral hemisphere, and the Wernicke area is in the back. So if you have a lesion here, you can't speak, but you can understand. If you have a lesion here, you can speak, but you can't understand, and sometimes you can't even understand yourself. And so the speech comes out very disorganized. Freud saw that you could have so-called functional disturbances of speech in hysterics, for example, who had no lesions that you could see on an autopsy, or that we could now see on a scan. And so Freud developed a notion of aphasia, which was actually functional, where he said that what's happening is the function of language, of communication, is being disturbed, and the disturbance reaches out in the neural networks to the motor, the receptive function, to the writing function, to the understanding function, to all the mental functions are really part of mentation, which involves communication. And that book is extremely interesting, and what I would say is that if we want to have a functional view of mind, we have to go along with Freud in challenging this idea of localization. And I'm not a great expert on modern neurology, but I think there is still an emphasis on localization of brain function. Well, everyone wants to know where is the affect, or where is the mirror neuron located, yes. But they're not thinking functionally. I'll wrap it up. But you also have to think of the mind as a very, very complex thing, much more complex than the motor and sensory systems, and involved in this whole functional concept of mind and body.
I'm going to direct a direct question that I hope you'll answer after Dr. Lewis has a chance to go, or an observation, either one. In all of your presentation on somatic psychology, with the quotes that you read, etc., there was not a single reference to sexuality or to the function of the orgasm. And I think this is incredibly telling, and this is what separates Reich's work from others. There's a point to Reich's therapy, and there's an understanding of the role that sexuality and energy, as expressed in the sexual function, plays, that I think for many in so-called, in the somatic psychology field, is a way of, I think, of making it more palatable, more available to a wider audience, and not scare the bejesus out of people by talking about orgasm. So I know you'll have something to say about that later, but I just wanted to make that observation. Could you keep your comments brief so we can get as many people from you?
Yeah, I'll keep it as brief as I can. I'm sure you'll let me know if I...
Well, so we want to be sure that folks in the audience have a chance to.
First of all, I mean, I think that actually is one of the key points in my afternoon presentation is the issue of the function of the orgasm, the understanding of energy and pulsation in the organism, which I think ties right into what Dr. Weitzner is presenting. And the problem with when we began to talk, Dr. Schiff and I, about doing something around somatic psychology and doing this kind of presentation, I think that's the issue, and I think we're hitting on it, is how much these programs, I'm at the New School, and part of my presentation on attachment and attachment research, which I've done a lot of work in, and involved in the graduate seminar the last year that I was co-teaching there, with one of the key figures in attachment work these days. There is this constant interest in the body and physicality and soma, but there is a disconnect. There's an inability to move where all these things are leading. It's as if everything is leading to that that final, it's what goes on in astrophysics. It's that it all leads to a field theory. It all leads to a theory, a fully functional theory, and they can't quite get there. So what they do, going back to Dr. Bennett's early introduction, is they go finally, they say, well, it must be a God principle, or an organizing principle. And so I think that's central, and we'll come back to that. I think very, very crucially. I want to make a couple quick comments, notes that I made. First of all, Reich always said in many personal talks and interviews that were given, Reich speaks on Freud and other places, that after he died, everyone, or even before he died, everyone would start picking bits and pieces of his work to develop and present. Actually, when he was alive, they did, but they were afraid. Fritz Perls came to him with Heffelin, to wanting him to join him. He said, "No, you go your way. Just don't say that this is me. I have my own thing." Alexander Lowen came to him, wanted his approval. He said, "No, you go your own way. You're not trained."
You mean Freud or?
No, Reich came to Reich, and Reich said, "You go, do what you want. Just don't call it orgonomy. Don't say you're an orgonomist." John Karakos. I mean, we could list numerous people, and this continues after Reich's death and becomes even more proliferated after Reich's death. Different groups, different individuals, call themselves Reichian. They pick bits and pieces, or now more and more they call themselves, somatic psychologists, and they use essentially the terminology and the language, that was central to Reich's development and ergonomic, work as a functional discipline. And basically Reich disappears. But I think the crucial thing is what Dr. Bennett is saying, which is that where Reich disappears is because if you really, and what Dr. Weissner is saying, if you really embrace Reich's work fully and really look at it fully, it leads inevitably to the issue of the function of the orgasm and functional thinking and a kind of functional, a functional approach, which structurally, probably in our society, we're not capable of. Actually, the interesting thing about psychosomatic medicine, which we all forget about, is that one of Reich's key collaborators and the translator of his work, first translator of his work into English, was Theodor Wolff. And if those of you know, Theodor Wolff, who was one of the foremost, if you go into the Wikipedia probably, if they mention him, he was the founder and one of the key figures in psychosomatic medicine in the United States. He was not specifically interested in psychiatry. He went to study with Reich because he began to read some of the early papers, which John Clenz, one of our colleagues, has been translating, and Phil Bennett has been discovering in various ways. These early papers from Reich and Fenichel and others that were beginning to really push into this area of somatic psychology, somatic medicine. Wolff went with the specific purpose of connecting with Reich because he felt it was the first glimmer of an understanding of how the body and mind were functionally organized. The other point I would just quickly mention is we lose that Freud, Bruno Bettelheim wrote a little book called Freud and Man's Soul, which is a lovely, lovely book in terms of getting the feeling of what it was like in Vienna in that generation. And he points out that the use of the term soul in Freud was very active. It chose not to use it in translation into English because of the difficulty with American and British understanding what soul meant. For Freud, the use of the word soul was consistent with what has been presented here. It was not some little, sort of ghost-like figure following you, after death or persisting after death. It was really the embodiment of the totality of the organism, which is what he was really, talking about. And so, the last thing I would just say is that that becomes really crucial. And understanding that Freud, more and more I see now with new papers coming out, new things that are being finally revealed, how central Freud was to the development of Reich and the group around Reich, who really began this, Fenichel and a number of others, Wolff, that Freud really in many cases, laid out huge amounts of of information and direction, and then we can get into the history of this, which I'd like to, I won't digress, but due to where, if you're interested, you go to Reich Speaks and Freud, where psychoanalysis went, you know, with Freud's help and afterwards with people like Ernst Jones and people like this, into a much more dualistic and very, very limited concept of the supremacy of psychology. Reich always pointed out that Freud was very terrified that psychoanalysis would become biology, just an adjunct of biology. And Reich wasn't afraid of that. He felt it was an inevitable direction. So I think that's key. And the last thing I would just say is...
the third last thing.
No, okay, is that, you know, the issue is really that for Reich, the crucial thing is energy. And the other thing that hasn't gotten mentioned in your discussion, you mentioned energy, they don't, and this is something that happens very deeply, and we've seen this, you and I have talked about this, in particularly groups like core energetics and bioenergetics. The energy is very vaguely accessed and conceived and understood, whereas in orgonomy, we're talking about a literal, material, functional energy that can be materialized, can be demonstrated, can scientifically investigated for, you know, doesn't mean that everything that Reich had to say was correct, but it is available and material. It's a scientifically verifiable, you know, functional, you know, reality. So that's it.
Would you like to respond briefly to any one of the three comments?
Well, you know, all of these points are going to be elaborated on. They kind of, and they really stand as counterpoints. Okay, so we're talking about where somatic psychology is emerging from and how it differs and how it doesn't incorporate many of Reich's basic principles. But I like to look at the other side as well. And I think it's an important thrust in terms of the development of psychotherapy and the incorporation of bringing in some areas, maybe not totally at the core of Reich's work, but very central to Reich's work. And as we see, and as was well recognized in terms of what this totally embodiment means, maybe more focused on the body and not incorporating the total organism, whether or not we're dealing with sexuality or not, where energy stands, are all very important points. And points of distinction which will be elaborated upon. However, at the same time, many of Reich's other aspects, which kind of you could say are only taking bits and parts, are coming into the field. And that's what I see as a growing edge in psychology and an entry point. And again, it's through experience. And what I've noticed with students, as maybe some of you have noticed with yourself or students, is that as people begin to make contact with themselves in a similar way, they say, huh, what is this energy I feel? You know? And what is this sensation when I exhale? And why suddenly, when I'm doing this experiment and I'm focusing on my hand, do I feel this pulsation? And how this pulsation makes me change? And that becomes an entry point into these ideas. So rather than kind of like putting and twisting about where it's not, which is important, also kind of saying it's where it's moving and what they're incorporating. And
he's always been my optimistic polar opposite.
Yeah. We need to give the audience an opportunity.
Yes,
please keep your questions brief and address them to one of the four of us. And we'll take
Or to all
first.
of us.
And no, we will not talk about it. First and then second. Okay, please.
I just want to make a statement. I mean, because I'm going to so many seminars, as I said, like with Dan Siegel and other people who are involved in all of this. He doesn't know who Reich is. And my fear has been over the years that it's disappearing.
He's lying, by the way.
Excuse me?
He's lying.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's nice to hear. I mean, and I have a connection with him personally, too. So, but basically, I go up to people after they give their presentations, and I say, do you know about Reich's work? Many of them say no. And it's frightening that it's actually disappearing. That's why this was so exciting. And I hope that, and I agree with you, I mean, you know, the whole energy, that they're not looking at energy, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's exciting that they have energy, but not, you know, not really looking at it as right there. And I just hope that there's a way to start to to get through.
Just quickly, let me just say,
That's fine.
tag on to that. I know you're getting.
He's whatever
Just quickly, when I say lying, is that many of these individuals, Siegel and others I've been at attachment conference with,
Okay.
when they asked about whether they knew about Reich, say no. And one of them, who will go unnamed, basically mentioned, well, I do, but I can't publicly acknowledge it or openly acknowledge it because it leads in a direction that would undermine. And this has always been, we've had physicists who have said the same thing. We know that we've known physicists who have said, well, yeah, I've been interested in it, and actually I've done some of the experiments, and they actually sort of, you know, he really was onto something, but my career would be over if I made that public.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Along with the repression of the sexual element of Reich's work in somatic psychology, it seems like there's a double repression, because there's also the political aspect of Reich's work that much of Reichian-related therapy suppresses or represses. And I'm wondering whether, in fact, it's possible that both repressions, you know, the politics of the body in the social world, is something that without that, can there really be a somatic psychology that addresses people's experience in the world? And aren't both those repressions telling?
That's an excellent point, and it can't be, and it is being addressed. It wasn't addressed in my talk, obviously, but it is being addressed within the somatic psychology literature. and so I think it's there. It's definitely there, as you're pointing out. Yeah.
Okay, it has to be brief because we're well past our time slot here, so go ahead, please.
The value of the somatic approach in today's culture, of the strong appeal to the head, you know, and all our technology. It's just that, do you think that's a more helpful way to build up tolerance to contact in people? Because it's not just about contact, but it's about, you know, building your tolerance for it. And we're, you know, we're cut off to, I think, to a large degree because of all this exposure to the visual and to the head. So do you think that might be part of the reason the somatic approach is regaining popularity?
Possible, but I agree with your statement that as we continue using just our eyes, just our head, and we're looking here continually, oh, I'm still looking, I'm sorry. As we continually look continually in that little screen, it's very hard to be in contact with the rest of us.
Pulls it up.
I just want to say that my limited experience with, quote, somatic or embodied psychology, implicit in the terms is the idea that psyche and soma are separate. And that almost everybody that I've experienced presenting their revelation that our body is an important thing to pay attention to is dealing with the body really from here down and as an observer.
Okay.
One was separate, actually, you know, the brain is now.
We were scheduled to have a 15-minute break. If we keep it to 10 minutes, we can get much closer to being back on track. So let's reconvene at 10 of 11.
And where